There is a kind of pain humans have never been able to hide from. Not war, not hunger, not even childbirth. Those at least end. A rotting tooth does not end. It just gets worse, every single day, until something breaks, the tooth or the person carrying it. For most of human history, there was no cure for that pain. Only ways to survive it. Today we assume a toothache means an appointment, a chair, a needle, and it's over. For thousands of years, it meant none of that. It meant living inside your own skull. Until the pain either passed on its own or someone pulled the tooth out with force. So how did humans go this long without an answer to something this common? The story starts earlier than you'd think, and it starts with a worm that never existed. Skeletons from 10,000 years ago already show the damage. Cavities, abscesses, jawbones with holes worn straight through from infection. Early humans didn't get fewer toothaches than we do. In some ways, they got more. Grinding stones left grit in every meal, and that grit wore teeth down to the nerve. A worn tooth exposes the pulp inside it. Exposed pulp means constant, grinding pain. There was no diagnosis for this. There was no word for nerve. There was only agony. And the closest thing to treatment was pressing a hot ember against the tooth and hoping the burn would silence whatever was screaming inside it. It rarely worked twice. Ancient civilizations needed an explanation, so they built one: the toothworm. A Sumerian tablet, 6,000 years old, describes a worm that lives inside the tooth, gnawing at the root, feeding on the gum, causing the ache when it moves. The idea traveled everywhere: Egypt, China, India, later all through Europe. Because it explained something real. Pain that comes and goes, that burrows deeper, that nothing outside the mouth seems to cause. A worm fit the evidence perfectly. It was also completely wrong, and it delayed real treatment for thousands of years. Because if a worm is the problem, the cure is smoke, charms, and prayer, not the tooth itself. Ancient Egyptian remains tell a different, more physical story. Skulls have been found with tiny holes drilled through the jaw, straight into an abscess, a crude way to let infected pus drain out and relieve the pressure. It likely worked, for a while, and it must have been done without anything to numb the pain of the drilling itself. Egyptian medical texts list pastes of herbs and honey packed against aching teeth. Not because anyone understood infection, but because something had to be tried. By the time of ancient Greece, physicians were at least looking at the tooth directly. Hippocrates wrote about extracting teeth with iron instruments, and about cauterizing gums, burning them deliberately to stop bleeding or kill infected tissue. The Romans went further and built actual dental tools: forceps, elevators, wires, to splint a loose tooth back into the jaw. Roman writers even describe packing a cavity with metal. None of it came with anesthesia, a Roman extraction and a prehistoric one. Felt the same to the person in the chair, like violence, just aimed correctly. Progress didn't stop with Rome. In the Islamic Golden Age, physicians pushed surgery further than anyone before them. A physician working in 10th century Spain designed dozens of dental instruments still recognizable today: forceps, scalers, tools to realign crooked teeth. He wrote the first detailed descriptions of tooth extraction as a careful procedure, not a brute force one. His surgical texts were copied and studied across Europe for the next 500 years. But even his own writings had no answer for the pain of the procedure itself, only for doing it more precisely. For the next 1,000 years, almost nothing changed. In medieval Europe, the person you went to for a toothache was often the same person who cut your hair, or your blacksmith, because both jobs already involved sharp tools and a strong grip. Barber surgeons pulled teeth in the street, in market stalls, at fairs, sometimes with a crowd watching, sometimes with music playing to cover the screaming. There was no sterilization, there was no numbing agent beyond wine, or nothing at all. Infection from a bad extraction could spread to the jaw, the throat, the bloodstream, and kill a person faster than the original toothache ever would have. People delayed as long as they physically could, because the cure was almost as feared as the disease. Even into the 1700s, tooth pain was still treated as something to endure, not solve. A French surgeon changed the direction of the whole field, arguing dentistry should be its own discipline, studied and practiced deliberately, not a side task for whoever owned pliers. He described gum disease properly, designed better replacement teeth, and is remembered as the father of modern dentistry for exactly that shift, from pull it and hope to something closer to a real medical field. What he still didn't have was any way to stop the pain of treatment itself. That problem was almost a century away from being solved. Even as dentistry became more scientific, replacing a missing tooth stayed grim work. Wealthy patients in the 1700s and 1800s wore dentures made from real human teeth, pulled from the poor who sold them, or gathered from the fallen after battle. After one especially brutal battle in the early 1800s, so many young soldiers' teeth were taken from the dead that the dentures made from them were sold across Europe for decades under one grim nickname. A solution to one problem had quietly created another. The real breakthrough came from an unlikely place: traveling shows, where entertainers used a strange gas to make audiences giggle and stumble for fun. A dentist in the crowd watched a man injure his leg badly under the gas without reacting to the pain at all. He put the pieces together immediately. If it blocks that pain, it can block this pain. He tried it on himself, on his own tooth, and it worked. A stronger gas followed soon after, tested publicly in a crowded operating theater, in a demonstration that stunned every surgeon watching it. For the first time in the entire span of human history, a person could have a tooth removed, and simply not be there for the worst part of it. Everything after that point moved fast by comparison. Local anesthetics arrived within decades, numbing just the area, not the whole body. X-rays let dentists see decay before it became an emergency. Fluoride, discovered by accident in a town with unusually strong teeth and oddly stained enamel, became the single biggest reason childhood tooth loss collapsed across the next century. What used to be a lifelong, unsolvable threat became a checkup, a cleaning, a filling done in an hour with no memory of any pain at all. Titanium implants, developed decades later after researchers noticed bone fusing permanently to metal by accident, gave people a replacement tooth that could last a lifetime. Digital scanning replaced painful mouth impressions, and robotic-guided tools now place implants with a precision no hand alone could match. It is worth sitting with how recent that actually is. For nearly all of human history, a toothache was simply something you lived with, or something you survived removing. Between a worm myth and an operating theater, humanity finally answered a pain it could never explain. It just took about 10,000 years to get there.